Welcome to the second video in my Understanding the Damage of the Last Spell video series. In the first video, we talked about the ins and outs of the damage formula. How does it work? What intuitions should we have? How should we think about stats? How should we value stats? And then a bunch of kind of like mathy things like what are diminishing returns? What are local maxima? How do these things affect the way that the formula works? This week, we're not so much going to focus on the game and the numbers and how to get bigger numbers. And instead, we're going to focus on the tool that we used to reframe our intuitions. And that is a spreadsheet that I created that simulates the damage in the last spell. I provided that spreadsheet as part of a download for the previous video, and it's linked in the video description here if you're interested in playing with it. But this video is going to give you the foundation to understand how to play with it more effectively, how to use it correctly, what you can get out of it, and how it all works. So if that sounds at all interesting to you, buckle up because we're going to be doing a lot of spreadsheeting. Okay, so this one's going to be all over the place. I apologize in advance, but let me get the mic moved, and I got a lot of screens going on here. I got the spreadsheet over here. I got my other screen over here with some various bits and bobs. I got a laptop with the last spell down here, and then you're over here. So we're going to talk about the spreadsheet and all of the ins and outs and intricacies of it, because it's honestly changed a lot since the last time I showed it, which is crazy to think. But this video is supposed to come out a week after the last one. It's now been almost 2 weeks, maybe even a little longer. And the reason is that I've done a bunch of work on the spreadsheet in the interim, and I plan to do more work as we go, but my goal is to make it as absolutely accurate as possible, and I have done a lot of work to that end. So, without further ado, let's start diving into it, and we'll talk about its usage and those sorts of things. So the first thing you're going to notice is that this landing page has changed. So I added a README that provides a bunch of information about the spreadsheet, gives it a title, shows the version number, which now I'm tracking version numbers. So if you copied an old version, come get the latest version. As of recording this, it's version 1.13. We've gone through 4 iterations since the last video. There were a couple bugs. Nothing game breaking, nothing mind blowing. None of my conceptualizations of damage in the game have changed as a result of them, but there were a lot of like fiddly rounding issues and those sorts of things. We'll talk a little bit about those as we move forward. But what you're going to do is when you land on the spreadsheet, again, link in the video description, you are not going to have edit access. So you won't be able to do anything. So you're going to want to go to File, and you're going to click Make Copy. You can name yours whatever you want. This is going to be my demo, the last spell damage calculator, and I'm going to click Make Copy. It's going to turn me blue because my entire monitor over here is blue while we're waiting for the spreadsheet to copy. In fact, we could go back. Never mind. It has cooperated before I could do anything. So let's talk about the README just very briefly. So first of all, it calls out the 2 major things that I think are important for you to remember. One of them is make a copy. And then if you break that copy, which may happen, there's a lot of spreadsheets are fragile. We'll just say that. Make another copy. Throw that one away. Start fresh. Try again. The next section here covers the motivation. Why did I create this? The short version that we covered a bit last time is that there may be hundreds of decisions that you make when you're building a hero in the last spell. You pick some reliability, you pick some other level ups, you do all these things, and then you really get one data point at the end of your game to answer whether you did a good job or not. And that's how good is the hero. And this can lead to a lot of causal versus correlative complexities. And what I mean by that is that you might always take reliability. And as a result, when you get a really strong hero, you might look and go, the reason that I have a strong hero is because I took a bunch of reliability. The reality, based on the math, that has been discussed at great length is that reliability was not the reason that your hero is strong. And I'm sorry to inform you if this comes as a shock to you, but reliability was not the reason. And that was a correlation-based relationship, not a causal relationship, which means that The reason that your hero is strong was not caused by reliability. Now, because there are so many of these decisions, we can't separate which ones are the good ones or the bad ones. And the value of the spreadsheet is that it gives us a time machine. We can go back and level our hero back down to 6 and make different changes for the second half. We can swap in a damage increase, let's say a physical damage increase for the reliability that we chose early in the run, and answer the question of how much stronger could our hero have gotten. We can essentially inspect every individual decision that we made and come up with a much better idea of why the hero is strong and which of our decisions were good versus bad, versus only having this sort of like, here's my aggregate hero. Are they good? If they are, I have to assume all the decisions that I made were good too. So that's why we're doing this. Next up, you have a little section here that just has all the sheets and what they're for. I figured this was a good thing. It also links to them. Then there's a little bit of a thanks section. Thank you again to Abigail, Nam, T-Biscuit, Ranzera, Champion Jan, Adex, and all of the Potamus people for listening to me rant ad nauseum about random things that have made this spreadsheet as accurate as it is. There is also a call to action at the bottom here to join the Discord and consider subscribing. If you're using a spreadsheet and you're not part of the Discord, come on in, join. We have an incredibly friendly group of people, and we'd love to have you all, and tossing a sub helps the channel. But the last thing we want to talk about on the README is recent changes. So I am tracking all of the changes that I've made. If we head over to the changelog, we can see the full version here, but you can see everything for version 1.1 through 1.13 has been changes that I have made in the lead up to this video. It's the reason the video is delayed, because there was so much complexity that needed to be ironed out and fixed and tweaked just to make sure that things are just right. But without further ado, now we're going to dive into the body of the spreadsheet itself. And the only thing that I want to say before going forward is there are really two ways to utilize the spreadsheet. There is what I refer to as like the lazy way, and then there's what I refer to as the full Monty. And we're going to focus this video on the full Monty, which is the version that gives you all of the benefits of the spreadsheet. It allows you to do both level up what ifing and also gear what ifing, whereas the lazy version does not give you any of the gear capability. But without further ado, sheet number 1 is your hero sheet. And the first thing that you should know about the sheet is that it is color coded. So there are a few colors that are important for you to be aware of. White cells are the cells that you should be filling out. So you can go ahead and edit any of the white cells, and it will only give you information, and the spreadsheet will be used appropriately. Colored cells, be them blue or gray or whatever, are cells that you shouldn't edit because there are formulas in there. And if you edit them, you're going to break things very fundamental to the spreadsheet. And then last but not least, you have yellow cells. And yellow cells are the inline documentation. If you want to know what a specific thing does, the yellow cells are great for giving you that information. But now let's go through the sheet and talk about things. So the first thing in the upper left are your primary and secondary stats up here. This is where you enter the information about your hero. And it is where the full Monty portion of the approach comes in, because the way that you want to fill out information on the hero sheet is by stripping down your hero, removing all of their gear, and then entering their base stats, which is essentially the base hero template plus their traits. So now I'm going to switch over to the laptop for a second here, and we're going to go ahead and do this for our crash test dummy Florian. So if I bring up Florian, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take off all of their gear. And Florian is going to be ready to rock and or roll. And the first thing we're going to do after that is we're going to go into the character details page, and we're going to enter in all of their vital statistics. So Florian has 146 armor. They have 29 mana. Their armor is 30. I think I said armor for health, but that's okay. Their damage is plus 19. Their crit is plus 14. Their resistance reduction is 12%. Their accuracy is 12%. Then secondary stats, which are in the secondary attributes section, are 8, 8. Reliability is at 20%. Physical damage is 117. Magic damage is also 117. Range damage is 109. Their crit power is 150. Their opportunism is 120. Their isolation is 125. They have no multi-hits, no propagation bounces, the standard 85% propagation, and momentum. Then, once we've done that, so at this point, our hero is done. If our hero is not level 0, we could also enter in perks that they currently have. And then we'll enter in the information about their weapons. So we got them 2 weapons. The first is a spear. So we'll come in here, grab the spear. The weapon variant you can ignore, because weapon variant really is only useful if you're distinguishing between broken weapons and not broken weapons. So if you ever want to do a broken weapon, set that to 0. But this is a level 1 spear. And for now, let's just look at its primary attack, Impale, as the go-to. And then the other weapon that we're working with is a magic orb. This is such a classic pairing, spear magic orb, right? But the magic orb will be down here, and it is a level 0 magic orb, and it is going to be on Infect. So before we move on from this sheet, the only other things to mention, utilization. I've talked a bit about utilization in the past, but the short version of utilization is not every enemy can be isolated. Sometimes you have to work to isolate enemies. Sometimes you have to work to debuff enemies. And these percentages are what percentage of the time you think you will actually be able to activate isolation or opportunism or propagation. And I have found that 35, 50, 30, respectively, is pretty spot on for my playstyle, at least. It is by far the hardest to get isolated enemies. And opportunism is a little easier because debuff is a little easier to come by. You can also tweak these based on the gear that you have. Like, as an example, in this case, if instead of having a magic orb, we had something else that doesn't really debuff, it might be pretty hard to proc opportunism, and maybe you'd want opportunism even lower. The other 2 panels here that we're going to need to do some work with is the hero state. This is information about the hero at the given moment. So for instance, we know that they have a certain amount of mana, a certain amount of health. We know if their last attack type was different, that's only usable for flexibility. We know their distance to the target, useful for proximity shot. And then we have tiles moved, which is useful for momentum. So these are like fleeting ephemeral types of things that for each given attack you need to fill in. And then last but not least, we have the target stats. So the enemy that we are attacking, how much health do they have? Are they full health currently? What do they have for armor, block resistance, so on and so forth? We'll fill that stuff out a little later. But the thing that we need to do now is we need to go to the gear tab, which I have foolishly hidden. I will bring that back on the main on the main sheet. But the gear tab is going to give you a place to enter all the stats from your gear. And this is going to be useful for the spreadsheet because it means that it can tell you how one pair of pants compares to another pair of pants. So let's go through and do this really quickly. So we have a silver spear that comes with 8 mana. It comes with 3 daily mana regen, and it comes with 5% resistance reduction. We've equipped that. Then we also have a magic orb that has -10 hit points. Then we'll grab our helmet, which has basically 10% crit power. It is important to note that I don't bother with stats that aren't going to have a positive impact. Then we have this focus ring in the trinket slot that is going to have a -10% to damage and no other positive stats. Then we have this shield, and our shield, which goes in our offhand paired with our magic orb, is going to have 6% opportunism. Equip that. Then we have our reinforced body armor, which goes in the chest plate, and this has 28 health. It has 28 armor, It has -1 move, which we don't care that much about, 5% crit, and 3% dodge. That, again, isn't that important. One thing I should mention here, since it doesn't look like it's going to happen with this gear set, is if you have multiple armor procs on a particular piece of gear, sum them and put them in that one field. That's the best way to do it. So last but not least, we have the Slayer pants, which come with a 4% damage buff and not a lot else. So now that we've filled in all of that information, we are ready to rock and or roll. So I am going to commit Florian to certain death against the Horde and let some bad guys come in so that we can demonstrate what's going on here. So good old Florian here. So Florian, we're going to look at Impale first, right? So if we want to do that, we go to the level up tab, and right off the cuff, you're going to be presented with a bunch of information. The primary things are these two actual columns that you see here and here are all of the stats that you will see in the explanatory thing. Now, the numbers may be wrong because we haven't updated the target's stats. So let's do that really quickly. So this guy has 84 hit points. They are full health. They have no armor, no block. Their resistance is 5%. Their dodge is 15%. They are isolated, but they are not debuffed and not in the Haven. So now when we go back to our level up, what we're going to see is for isolation, we should be expecting 39 to 47 damage. I know why this is wrong. Don't worry too much about that. I'll talk about that a little later. It has to do with the fact that the last spell uses what is called banker's rounding. So in this particular case, this is 46.5. And the last spell, interestingly, will round this to 46, not to 47, because it rounds to the nearest even integer. But anyways, don't worry too much about that. The final numbers will look correct. So we have 194 through 232 and 310 through 371. So that's just, the nature of the beast, but the numbers do line up for both final and critical. And then if we wanted to check our other weapon, which is our magic orb, similarly, 184 to 223 and 294 to 357. Everything lines up. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of confidence in the spreadsheet. It certainly does to me, and I wouldn't worry too much about that little number there. No big deal. Banker's rounding. It took me like multiple days to even figure it out, but I digress. So with that, you kind of see at a very high level the way that this hero operates in the world, right? We're hanging out in the level up space, and we initially just see this row that shows us all of the information. Now, there's a bunch of other aspects to this sheet that are useful. The first is we have this section called optimal levels in the upper left. And optimal levels are going to show us what the best level ups that we could possibly take are. And right now, for our primary weapon, the best we could take is a large damage upgrade and a large physical damage upgrade. Now, that's because it's a physical weapon. Now, that's not going to help our magic orb. Our magic orb is going to scale best off of a large damage and a large isolation. Then finally, there's a blended value, which is going to recommend isolation again. Now, on the blended, we should briefly go back to the hero tab just to talk about this for a second. The blended will always be based off of this percentage up here to the right of the primary weapon header. If you set this to, say, 75%, because you're planning to use this weapon 75% and the secondary weapon only 25%, if we go back to level, isolation is still the best for us, but it's weighting the value of infect significantly less. So for the most part, I think generally leave this as 50-50, unless you're running some type of hero combination, like weapon combination, where one of the weapons used 90% of the time and the other one only 10% of the time. As an example, one of my community members is working on a pretty insane one hero Elderlicht challenge, and they are thinking about using a hand crossbow for damage and a sword just for mobility to get around the map. So it might make sense to have the sword be a lot less prominently equipped in here. But With that said, the thing that you can do from here is, let's say we actually wanted to grab and do the level up that's being recommended. We can paste it. I recommend using Control-Shift-V to paste only the values. And what you'll see is now we not only have the baseline damage that we've confirmed is exactly the same as what's in the game, but we also have what is the potential gain that we could gain from a particular level up. And very interestingly, we see it for both the primary and the secondary. So we can see that the spear is getting about a 15.5% increase, while the orb is getting an 18-ish% increase, which is very interesting and very useful when you are trying to figure out exactly what level ups you are wanting to do. Now, because of diminishing returns, if we keep doing these level ups, at some point, it's possible that isolation is going to kind of fall off and other things are going to be the best option. Because we're going with a hybrid build, isolation is probably going to hang in there for a fairly long time. But you can see up here in the upper left, the magical damage has indeed now become better for the orb than it was before. So if we were just trying to make the orb the best that we were, we could go ahead and grab this and paste it in. So the reason that this is so powerful is that you can do this as you're playing along, right? We could instead make it to the level up window and be like, okay, what am I looking for? It looks like isolation is really good for me. It looks like damage is really good for me, and kind of go from there. But what's really nice from a what-ifing perspective is, let's say instead of 15% dodge, because we're at 12% accuracy, what if this thing had 25% dodge? If we go back to the level ups, what you're going to see right off the cuff is now accuracy is king. So accuracy is providing more benefit than damage is providing as a primary level up. And the reason for that is these expected fields here and here. So once you enter the world of expected, you are no longer going to see these numbers in the UI anywhere, because they are simulated based on a large number of attacks. Like on average, how well are you going to perform? And so what you have is you have your crit, which is essentially like a weighted average between your non-crit hit and your crit hit weighted by how much crit you have. You have your accuracy, which is like how often are you going to miss and how much is that going to hurt your damage. In this particular case, you can see that the average damage here of our final value is like 213, but with accuracy, we're really only hitting for like 161.4. And then crit and accuracy is going to give you that combined view. Then that gets summed into a final, and then we can see the delta of our expected as opposed to the delta of our overall, which can be very, very useful. Now, we talked a little bit about utilization, and it's worth mentioning before we leave the level up sheet. So you're going to see a lot of places where I've added this checkbox where it says actual include utilization. So if I check this box over here, what you're going to see immediately is that the numbers get worse. Specifically, the isolation is going down by the amount that we utilized. Now, I added these checkboxes because I wanted actual out of the box to match the game, so that when people play it, they don't immediately go in and why does this number not line up? But for all of the estimated stuff, it's already including utilization. So it's already kind of discounting isolation and opportunism so that you don't predict that you're going to be wildly overpowered. And like I said before, the reason for that is that if at 30%, isolation is dominating the charts in terms of being the best possible stat that you could take, imagine how good it is at 100%. You'd never choose anything else. Also, just the fact that the spreadsheet is offering up accuracy as the best option, like let's go ahead and grab a couple more blended level ups, right? So we just gained 10% accuracy. So what we're going to see is our numbers went up because we took isolation. And in fact, let's what if this more specifically. So I'm going to only take accuracy, right? So our numbers don't change, but our expected value from accuracy goes up. So you can see all by itself, taking that accuracy is almost a 14% increase in damage. And then if we grab another one, we're going to see once again our expected is getting closer and closer to the average. But this time, because we were almost at the accuracy cap, aka we almost had enough accuracy to overcome the enemy's defenses, then now we're only getting a 1% lift. And if we took another accuracy, we're going to get a big fat 0 because we're no longer fixing a problem that exists. And this was one of the observations that I made previously, which is that accuracy is basically king if you need it. So the level up sheet, what's really cool about it, I think, is that it's designed for you to play as you go. So let's say we do our first level up and we're like, okay, this first time I took accuracy, but I could only find a small accuracy increase. And then I didn't get offered isolation, but I took a bit of physical damage and that was a medium upgrade, right? And it's going to show me that what we got was we got about a 14.5% increase on our primary weapon, and we got about an 8% increase on our secondary weapon, because the secondary weapon is only benefiting from the accuracy, whereas the primary weapon is benefiting from the accuracy and the physical damage. So you can go ahead and track this, because everywhere else in the spreadsheet, we're about to go talk about gear in a second, but everywhere else in the spreadsheet is going to feed off the top line numbers that you filled in your level ups, right? That's what this drop down did. Generally don't change this unless you really have a good reason. But it basically says hero, gear, and levels is what all of the projections in the spreadsheet are going to be based off of, which means that as you add levels in level up, you're going to be changing your hero's stats, which in turn is going to change all the projections moving forward in the sheet. So I think that's pretty useful. That's basically this sheet in a nutshell, but you can see very quickly that you can go through and be like, let's just see, before we go, let's just take a large damage increase, right? And we're just going to do it for like 18 levels, right? And what we're going to see is we're going to see live on the fly, diminishing returns happening, right? So we start out and we take that first upgrade and we're getting like 9% increase. Nice. That's awesome, right? We're taking a 10% damage increase and we're getting 9% of it. But by the time we hit level 18, if all we've been doing is mainlining damage, we're only getting like 3.5% value from it. And I think this is one of the conclusions that I came to that I tried to share in the last video, is that you need to diversify. Because if I come down here, right, and I say, well, now I'm going to take that accuracy bump, and I got that large accuracy bump. Instantly, we're getting like an 8% increase, a 13% increase, in fact, over here. And that's the idea. So you can always dip into it, into different stats. The other thing to note is, for a long time now, probably, the game has been screaming, take critical, right? So as we start to take critical, if we, hypothetically started to take critical at this point, we're going to see big improvements in our overall damage. And very quickly, you're going to see that crit and crit power is going to start going to the moon. Because that was one of the things that I talked about in the previous video, is that the synergy between crit and crit power is like an engine that starts to get going really fast, especially when you have a bit of damage behind it. But anyways, so you can go ahead and do all of your level ups and kind of like tweak your hero. But the other piece of improving a hero is the gear upgrade, right? So we had gear stats. We put into this this grid all of your stats about your hero. But now it's time to actually do a little bit of what ifing. The first thing you may notice is that there's a bunch of red, which seems a little weird. But the first place you want to look is down here at the weapon level up section. Because we have a level 1 spear, which is denoted here by this dropdown, we need to also let the game know, or let the spreadsheet know, that we are comparing a level 1 spear. Essentially what we did was we were comparing what would happen if we took a level 0 spear. And you can see our effective damage would go down by about 11%. But if we make these two equal, then we're not going to have a problem. So this sheet is the sheet where we can ask like what if questions. So as an example, we currently have a trinket that has negative 10% damage on it. So let's ask the question of what if we got a trinket that instead had 10% crit on it. And very quickly, what's going to happen is the spreadsheet is going to show us, first of all, the change in our gear, right? So we gained 10% damage. That's what this net says. And we gained 10% crit because that's what I put in there. So then if we come over here, we're going to see an increase to our damage that's coming from the fact that we no longer have negative 10% damage. And we're also going to see an increase in our estimated damage over here because crit is going to be significantly more beneficial for us, right? We're gaining a lot from crit in addition to what we're gaining. So it looks like we're gaining about 3% from crit, and it looks like we're gaining about 8% from damage in this particular case, right? It invalidates the whole row from the previous thing as soon as you put a value in here, right? So another thing that we could do is, let's say we're evaluating a new weapon. You can only evaluate weapons of the same type, but let's say we have the option of getting a level 3 orb, but the level 3 orb has, let's say, 5% magic damage and let's say 8% isolation. And we'll do that, right? So now in our secondary column over here, we see some massive gains, right? So our secondary column is showing us that we're getting almost a 40% increase, right? And we can delete these if we want to see that all by itself, just going up to a level 3 orb is giving us about 35%, and then the magic damage and the isolation is bumping those numbers up even higher. And so with this, we have the ability to kind of very effectively evaluate the overall benefit of various stats. Much like on the previous spreadsheet, we can also include or not include utilization. This won't change the percentages because all of our utilizations are percentages themselves, but it's still useful. And then the last thing that we can do is we can start asking about perks. So what if we wanted to take, let's pick a good one. Let's grab a magic fuel. So magic fuel adds damage based on the amount of mana that you have. So if we went ahead and let's go back to, for the moment, let's go back to our original setup, right? So we now have a bunch of zeros, right? But we could be like, how much does magic fuel benefit me? It's about a 10% increase right now. What about critical runes, right? We're only going to see that down here in the estimated because critical can only be estimated. It can't be anywhere else. But you can kind of go through and you can ask these questions like, how much would I gain from bodybuilder? About 5% right now. What about sheer power? We're getting nothing because we're not resistance capped. But if I went over to this hero and let's say that I said, now we're dealing with a kindled, right? So it has 60% resistant. If I came over here and then I said, what about sheer power? Now you're going to see some improvements. So you're going to see a larger improvement on the spear because it doesn't have the innate reduction that the orb has. But on both of them, you're going to see an improvement because of the way that sheer power halves the remaining resistance. So you can see that. And then we can go through all of these, right? We could go through exploit weakness, so on and so forth. And we could get a really good idea of how various perk builds can also build in. You can use the perk what-ifing if you go the lazy approach being just filling in your actual stats here. You can still use the perk portion, but the gear grid requires you to have your main gear stats that you can then compare against. But I think this is really useful because you can ask questions like, so I got these pants that have 4%, but what if I found a pair of pants that have 12% crit but no damage on them? And what we're going to see is that our damage goes down because damage is something that can be calculated in the actual space, right? But what's really interesting is that our estimated numbers go up because crit is going to be gaining more than we're losing from losing damage. So, useful little ins and outs there. But I think this sheet in particular is a really useful companion. One of the things that I found particularly interesting, and I don't know if we'll do a demo of it here. Why don't we do a demo right now? Just because I think it's very, very interesting. So I'm going to switch over our magic orb to be a hand crossbow, everyone's favorite. And it's going to be a level 1 hand crossbow. And for gear stats on this one, we're going to give it the oft desired 1 multi-hit. Right? So 1 multi-hit, you get that initial adamantium crossbow, I think it is, and you're kind of good to go. Right? So at the moment, our secondary weapon is 0. Right? And I'm going to say, what if I was offered a level 3 hand crossbow that didn't have the multi-hit on it? And what you're going to see is that our final estimated damage actually goes down, which is so cool, right? So the benefit of having more base damage from our hand crossbow does not outweigh the multi-hit. And believe it or not, we have to go all the way to level 5 before we actually see our final number down here in the lower right go positive, which is insane to me. A level 1 hand crossbow or level 0 hand crossbow with multi-hit is better than a level even 4, I believe. 4 might eke it out. Let's check. Nope, 4 is a 1% damage decrease. Now, there are other factors that might make it better to take a higher level crossbow. You might be getting other stats from it, those types of things. But the value of multi-hit is not to be underestimated. So with that done though, I'm going to go ahead and delete this, and I'm going to go back to the gear stats, and we're going to go back to 6% opportunism and negative 10% health, because that was what we were going there. And we will take this, and we'll go back to magic orb, just because I think this is a better example to use. We'll switch back to infect, and now we're going to talk about what I think is probably the coolest display in the game. And here it is. This is the grid of every potential level up that you could possibly take. Now, you're going to say, hey, what about health and mana and daily health regen? Okay, I got you. Come down here and grab weapon grid full, and you will get the one that includes all of the generally don't benefit you stats, which are like health regen, etc. So for the most part, I leave this one hidden because 9 times out of 10, this is going to be good. Now, what this is showing us is it's showing us exactly what the level up sheet showed us, but in more detail. And that is where our strengths are. The body of the grid is a heat map. Green is good, red is not so good. But then you get purple highlights at all of the maximum numbers. So we see that accuracy and crit power is surprisingly good. You see that resistance reduction and crit power are also pretty solid because you're getting some value from resistance reduction and you're getting some value from accuracy. The reason for this is because the enemy that we're currently targeting is dodgy and resistant. So let's go back over here and let's go back to some more reasonable ones. Like let's look on the game for a second. You have 5% resistance and 15% dodge. Then we're going to come over to our grid once again, and we're going to see it instantly shift, right? So now we're targeting a different enemy, and we can see isolation, very dominant. Crit power has some nice value in it as well. And then physical damage is also interesting. And you also have a little bit for crit. What I think is really interesting is let's say we go back to our level up sheet, hypothetically say that we picked up a little bit of crit. So we're going to grab like a few large ones like this. Like let's go 3 large ones. Now we're going to see relatively small gains, right? Our estimated gains are about 4%, give or take. But if we go back to the weapon grid now, right? Remember, it's counting things. So right now, crit power is going crazy, right? So crit power plus damage is off the charts good at like a 22.4% increase. So if we go over here to the level ups, we can see the same exact thing. Right? So every single one of our level ups is requesting this. So let's go ahead and grab this and let's just take that level up, right? So we're going to see a massive increase because crit plus crit power has this kind of like electric effect. So our estimated increase is all the way up at 22% and it's holding strong, right? Because our damage is relatively low. We haven't taken any damage on this hero. So each time it's sticking with damage, but it's offering up crit power. And if we go back to the weapon grid, we're going to see this slowly falling off. 21 has become 18. And because one thing that we can see that I think is cool here is we have 18 and 18.0. I bet if we take one more level up of crit power, we're going to see on the weapon grid that, yep, critical has now exceeded damage. The diminishing return of damage has allowed critical to pull back up into the lead, and now critical is being offered. So you can see how you can utilize a spreadsheet to kind of like do a bunch of what ifing and see what's good, or where like your hero should head, what you should be taking, what you should be looking for when you reroll. So hopefully what you can see from this is how you can utilize this as a tool. You can utilize it as a tool for just like playing around. I've done a lot of experimenting, like, oh, what happens if we do this? What happens if we do that? But you can also utilize it for as like a play companion, right? Each time you level up, enter the data that you have for what your last level up it looks like. Keep updating your gear in the gear stats section as you take new pieces of gear, and then use level up and gear up to do that. Use the weapon grid to visualize where the majority of the value for your level ups are. I think this gives you a great idea of where you should be shopping, right? I want to be looking a little bit in isolation, a lot in crit power, a lot in critical, and that helps me to understand where I can get value. And I think that's the overview. So the next thing we're going to talk about here is just one very large aha moment that I think was fascinating. So if you've made it this far in the video, we're going to stop talking about the specifics of the spreadsheet. There is a lot of detail. The spreadsheet has like 20 something sheets in it that are all, doing different calculations behind the scenes so that these grids can be computed live on the fly and our level ups can be estimated and all that type of good stuff. But the spreadsheet has had one major flaw, and I think it might be interesting to some people. So, let me know in the comments if this is actually interesting. But when we were putting stuff in, when we were getting these values out in final and critical, and I mentioned this earlier in the video, the isolation numbers didn't quite match. And I said, oh, that's because, and then I kind of like gave a half answer. The full answer I think is really interesting. So the last spell is a C# game. It is written in C# and Unity. And all programming languages have their nuances. And I was running afoul of one particular nuance. Whenever I would do these computations, the first 5 times I tried to create this video, these numbers didn't match the game. And it was painful. I may or may not, it might be too painful to even watch, but I might take the like midpoint of the last video that I tried to record, and just like the utter sadness that was on my face was otherworldly when I realized that the numbers didn't match once again, despite my best effort. If we come back over here and we look, we will see that the spreadsheet is saying that we should be hitting for 151 to 170 damage. And on crit, we should be hitting for... And the reason is, and I'll bring up I'll bring up the formula here, and we'll make this bigger for a second. And in fact, this is the wrong formula. So we'll go to this one here, level up primary no util. And this is going to give you, first of all, this will give you a feel for what exactly is going on behind the scenes. So over here, we have all these formulas that are doing all of the computations, like all of the propagation bounces, all kinds of things. And for a given stat, if we wanted to get really crazy, we could go like, let's go with damage data. So this sheet has every perk combination that you can imagine. So small damage with physical damage, damage with momentum, so on and so forth. And this sheet has all of that computed for every single one of these with the relative benefits that you would get over here. And this is what we aggregate into that weapon grid. But anyways, if I hide this sheet, so I had this problem where if we scroll over here, my final damage and my critical damage weren't lining up. And the reason goes back to what I was saying before, which I got distracted from for a moment here. And that is that C# has a really, really interesting, and I use that in the most whatever way, nuance that I was unaware of. And that is that C# does not round with math.round, which is the standard rounding function, does not round the way we'd expect it. Normally, if I had 2.5 and I called math round on most programming languages, what we would expect that I would get is 3, because we have learned that 0.5 and above gets rounded up and 0.49999 and below gets rounded down. C# does not agree. Apparently, they are basing this off of IEEE, so I have a bone to pick with IEEE, but they use something that is called bankers rounding. It's also referred to as midpoint round to even. And basically what it means is that when you have a number that has a perfect 0.5 on it, it is going to be rounded up or down based on which direction the even number is. So 2.5 would be rounded down to 2, whereas 3.5 would be rounded up to 4. The reason for this is actually really cool now that I understand it. And it comes down to, if you have a large set of numbers and you round them and all the 0.5s get rounded up, then the average of that data set is also going to go up by 0.5, potentially, as much as 0.5. Whereas if you do this up and down, sometimes up, sometimes down, the average is going to remain relatively constant, assuming the distribution of odd 0.5s and even 0.5s are relatively equal, which statistically over a large data set is to be expected. So until I did that, because you can see this, you can see evidence of this in the last spell in the game. Sometimes it will show you a number. You'll multiply that number by your crit power and you'll be like, wait, I got 265.5 and it's showing 268. Cool. But I got 264.5 and it's giving me 264. This doesn't make any sense. And the reason is that they are using C#'s rounding function, which is a banker's rounding function. And so I implemented banker's round in the Google spreadsheet so that all of our numbers would line up. This was like days of my life to figure out so that all of our numbers work out. But it's really important to me that this spreadsheet and the things that we put out as a channel have a high degree of quality. So hopefully that is something that you care about and you appreciate also. But I thought that was kind of a fun little anecdote, and I learned something. I mean, I've been doing computer science and like data science for 20 years, and I had never really run into this in any form. I think it's insane that C#'s default round uses this because it's not kind of like common intuition, but it does. And it showed up in us getting our spreadsheet to match the actual last spell's code and by extension, the last spell's UI. So I thought it was interesting. So I will leave you there. I have had a lot of fun making the spreadsheet. We still have one more video in our Understanding Damage series. But if you enjoyed this and this is the kind of thing that you like, leave a like and subscribe, please. We've made some recent changes, so when I put out these more bespoke videos, they will show up in your sub box, but all my other content will not. So if that sounds good to you, please feel free to join the gang. And then if you want to join the Discord, that's where we build all of these things. That's where we collaborate and do the things that we do. So we'd love to have you over there as well. I think we have a pretty awesome community. But I think that's going to do it for me. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video, which is going to be a tier list of all the stats, which is sure to ruffle some feathers. But for now, have a good one, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.